He'll be followed by Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank you, Mayor Bowser, Chief Financial Officer Lee, City Administrator Donahue, Director Reed, colleagues, and all the staff that helped to prepare this year's proposed budget. I'm thrilled to see the $60 million investment in the regionally competitive sports and recreation complex to provide recreation for all people in the District of Columbia. As you know, I believe that recreation was a tool that helped me connect with mentors and pretty much kept me off the streets and saved my life. So more is needed in our city. I also applaud the $3.8 million out of school core recreation programming, $5 million for out of school time. It is my belief that we need to dig deeper and get more money to grassroots organizations. We've lost a lot of that since we closed down the DC Youth Investment Trust Corporation, and we never fully recovered from that. I see also additional $6 million for violence prevention and diversion amongst at-risk youth. And I'm still not quite sure what happened to the proposed $50 million for building blocks that was supposed to be focused on 151 blocks that I believe there's pretty much got shifted back under the Deputy City Administrator's office, and some of the workers have been scattered throughout the city. So I'm looking forward to hear about that. Also, this $1.7 million for the 23 staff allotted to provide care coordination for at-risk individuals. I think that's good. I'm also want to hear more about how these funds will be spent and working together to coordinate different programs. We need more violence interrupters and training in those areas, not just Ward 7 and 8, as you see and watch the news and see the data. The violence is all over the city now in record numbers. And I think we should have more money dedicated towards that. I appreciate also the $3.8 million dedicated towards the school-based mental health, though I worry that number is extremely too low for the complex needs of our students. We know that the data reflects that our students have been suffering significantly during this pandemic as relates to mental health services, and I'm worried that the average of one mental health professional per school, averaging 400 students a school, is not adequate to address the need. I hope that the allocation of the $7.3 million for grants for victims of sexual assault and the $40 million for gun violence prevention prioritize critical mental health needs and really touch those 151 blocks in a comprehensive way. I'm still waiting to see how that's going to roll out going through the summer months, in which, you know, those months are typically more violent than the other seasons. I think that we need a deeper dive into comprehensive mentoring for our youth. Going to the schools, the culture has shifted from elementary to middle school, even to high school, just relates to the violence in and around schools. I do not believe that the $2.6 million allocated towards MOCA does enough for our returning citizens population. I remain concerned about the prioritization and requirements for projects within the budget. I think this overall looks good as a budget overall, but I want to take a deeper dive into the budget as I get more time, as we go through some of these questions, to figure out how we're going to get people from A to Z. Because we feel like the city is growing financially, but those who are in the class of the have-nots are suffering tremendously, as I get calls over and over again about people still not getting their EROP payments paid and fear of going to court and losing their housing as we dump more and more money into it. We are constantly getting calls about repairs for properties falling apart, and so I'm hoping that this additional money added towards Housing Reduction Trust Fund is speeded up through the process so we can ensure that people can live in quality, healthy living situations throughout the city. I'm also happy to see that Henley and Simon were in the budget for modernizations, because I do know that some of the schools that have been modernized, are falling apart. I've been to Boone several occasions for the school falling apart, and at Cassia, several plumbing issues. We were at Fort Furby Hope. The wreck was built less than a year ago, and the ceiling was leaking, the fork came up, and the pool is leaking water in less than a year. And so while we're dumping money into these, we want to make sure they have quality services done. And this was done by MC and Bill in our community. So as we put money into these projects, we want to ensure that we are using DCRA to make sure these properties are not falling apart. Again, I want to thank you, Mayor Bowser, and your team for touching some of the high priority areas that I did to the residents of Ward 8. I look forward to my colleagues looking deeper into how we can make this budget more sound. Again, thank you, Chairman, and thank you to my colleagues and administration for today. I look forward to the questions.
Yeah, the makerspace at MLK, which is amazing. Put a plug for that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes, thank you. I want to thank you, Mayor Bowser. I want to start off by asking, last year you announced an emergency response to violent crimes in the district and put together, which I know was not a permanent office, but the building blocks initiative, and to my understanding, is not where it was. It's kind of dwindled down and people have been shipped around. And we know that violence has not decreased. In fact, it's higher now than it was this time last year and continues to increase all across the city. Can you give us an update on the budget for that? I see us and where we are with that.
Sure. So as you know, council member, and similar to our COVID response or all of our emergency responses that are informed by emergency response strategies, we created an emergency operations center. And that center had a leader in Linda Harley Harper, but detailed employees from around the government, just like we did for our COVID response. The work of that emergency operations center is being baked in to all of our agencies, led by the violence prevention director, Linda Harley Harper, whose offices are in the city administrator's office.
And where are we with the 151 blocks we're trying to target? I know we started here in Ward 8 in the Anacostia area with intense work, but it seemed to dwindle. Are we still on track to reaching those 151 blocks, and what agency is responsible for responding to that? Because I know you said they're in all the agencies, but what's the plan?
So yes, in the 151 target blocks, as you know, are blocks that our analysis shows have the most gun activity, the most gun violence. And we are placed, what we call our place-based work, looking at the environment, whether it is the quality of buildings and repairs, streets, roads, alleys, trees, vacant buildings. That work we have put in the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. And it's their job to coordinate across the other government agencies for a coordinated approach on those blocks.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna move on. Affordable housing, as you know, continues to be a problematic issue in the city, and a $500 million contribution to House Building Trust Fund is great, with 41 million for project sponsored vouchers. We in our continuous oversight hearings, I guess, especially when Polly Donaldson was the director of DHCD, it was hard to get a clear understanding how the money was going to address 0 to 30% AMI and 31 to 50% AMI. How do you and your administration plan to address the low income residents trying to preserve housing in the district?
Well, we have a whole, there are a lot of housing investments. You mentioned the $500 million in the Affordable Housing Production Trust Fund. And by statute, there is there are buckets of how those monies can be invested for housing that is 50% and below of AMI. And that is as we seek applicants who want the support of the Housing Production Trust Fund, we will ensure that we are meeting those targets. We are also very focused on keeping people in the housing that they have. That is why we have included over 2 years very substantial emergency rent assistance to make sure that people can stay connected to housing. We've also invested in, Jenny will remind me the exact number of dollars for repairs to our public housing units, and working with the public housing authority to ensure that those monies are being invested and that the units most in need of transformation are being prioritized. We continue our commitment to connecting our unhoused residents to housing. This budget in the campaign to end chronic homelessness in the district is fully funded and should get us to our goals during this budget period. We continue also to rethink our shelter system for men. And we know that transformation is akin to what we were able to do in the family homelessness system that will allow us to drive down homelessness among men and people living in encampments, just like we were able to do for families. So if you ask me about what we're doing for our residents who have the least income, 0 to 30%, I think that we have initiatives in each one of the programs I just discussed.
And Mayor, the investment to repair our public housing units is $110 million to help repair or modernize more than 1,500 units of housing. There's also more than $200 million invested in the communities of Berry Farm, Northwest One, Park Morton, and Bruce Monroe to bring back public housing units to those communities.
Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned that it relates to Berry Farm. Because it's my understanding that residents were moved out over 400 units, and now we only really have the funding to build phase 1, which is a senior living facility. Can you speak to the plan of what Deputy Dempate is going to do to make sure the funding is there to bring those residents back? Because they're asking me, and I'm asking you to kind of help us to give them an answer about returning back in a timely manner.
Absolutely, Council Member. So in last year's CIP, you did see the funding for phase 1. In this CIP, what you'll see is funding for more than phase 1. It's actually more than $100 million just for the Berry Farm community over the next 6 years to do the needed work to begin for the full project.
Is that $100 million for the full project in Berry Farm? That's going to take way more than $100 million to bring back Berry Farm. We got whole infrastructure needs to be done.
Council Member, it's the investments to get the phases going. So as we get into later years of Berry Farm project and we have a better understanding of the cost to build the actual housing, some of the actual housing will be increasing that budget.
Thank you. I'll come back and follow up with that later. Mayor Bowles, allocated $10 million for Black Home Ownership Fund and Strike Force. How is that going to be used, and what agency will they be applying for to get that, and what's some of the requirements?
We are going to work with a strike force. You may remember that I created a strike force early in my tenure. Actually, Councilmember Bonds and Councilmember Silverman served on it to especially focus on rental housing in the district. I expect to create a similar strike force. It has the difference in a strike force and other groups is that it will be very limited in scope and time of work to help us develop the programs that are going to be most impactful for DC residents. So I would say by the end of the summer, we would have the scope of the program in hopes that it will be ready to go when this budget goes into effect on October 1st.
Okay, I look forward to seeing that information. You and I worked together, I know years ago, starting in 2017, on trying to get new recreation center built in Ward 8, and it was in the budget. We are in 2022, and 3 of those recs are still not built, and so we are seeing the money going into the budget, but not getting to construction. There's been some hold up with DGS. What is your plan to ensure that even with our senior wellness center, and the cost is still nothing, we're just frustrated with the money being there. And I know they were in the out years and we're up to those years, but still no traction on these recreation centers.
Well, council member, certainly we're committed to making sure that they're safe in recreation spaces all over the community. I don't know that we're behind on any of them, so we will work with you to look at the CIP, which of course is 6 years, to make sure we stay on track.
We are behind, and we want to have your commitment, as we talked about earlier, to make sure this comes to fruition. Because we don't want to have any empty promises to the residents. And in my letter to you, Mayor Bowers, about the budget for Ward 8, I talked about more cameras for public safety. And I see that there was some money allocated, I think 3.7 million, and then there was additional 9.4 million that went to, instead of surveillance cameras or cameras for public safety, 170 speed cameras, which, I guess they probably could check if somebody's speeding and commits a crime, they can check those too. But what is your commitment to ensuring that we can get more to increase public safety as relates to cameras and clear cameras that MPD can use?
We have and I think it's in this budget, in 22, a level of funding to replace some of our cameras, the MPD cameras, as you call their MPD cameras, and to replace, because some of the technology is becoming outdated, so they have to be replaced, and adding additional cameras. The new cameras will give us some more operability as well at night, so they can be more helpful.
Yes, and I would just echo what you said, Mayor. We both have funding in the operating budget to improve the cameras themselves and replace them so they're more accurate, as well as additional funding in the capital budget to continue to be able to add and replace cameras. So we're happy to talk to you and connect with MPD about locations that you're concerned about.
Chairman, I assume a little over my time.
Yes, we have another round.
Come back.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Robert White, who will be followed by Councilmember Bonds.
Budget. So we'll take this feedback also and try to find ways to incorporate explaining shifts that the public may not understand in easy to understand language.
Yeah, because I just feel like that's the number one thing. We were like, they're losing X million of dollars and not fully getting that we've made this switch in budgeting. But thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson. I'll just note, for all of the data requests that have been made today, they could just be sent directly to our budget director, Jen Budoff, who can then circulate it to all of the members and our staffs to keep things simple. So next up, we have Councilmember Trayon White, followed by Councilmember Robert White.
Yes, thank you. Just to jump right in, I see in the Mayor Marion Summer Youth Employment Program, it's $21 million in funding. Does this insinuate that it's going to be year-round funding? And is there anything different that happened in the previous years?
I think what you're seeing is a wage increase we're providing to participants in both the SYP program and all the city's training programs. We're increasing the wage of the participants, give them some more money, and also attract more people to it.
What about Project Empowerment? Because right now they're making less than minimum wage as relates to their wages.
They will now make minimum wage, council member.
And all of these wage increases will actually start this year on July 1st.
Great. I would like to know what those wages are, not at this moment, but at a later date. I did notice there were about $330 million for rehabbing, I guess, public housing. Like 1,500 units. Do we have a list of which properties will be rehabbed? Because I guess 2 years ago, maybe 3, I saw a list of all these properties that was going to get tore down. Then I saw Tyrone Garrett in like 2019 saying he had money, all this money to renovate these properties behind the residents to work on them. And so now I was just at started tours yesterday, and I noticed there were a lot of vacant units. And so do we have a list or idea of what properties we renovated so we can get people off the streets and into these houses?
Yes, council member. DCHA and our office worked very hard over the past year to put all the assets for the Housing Authority into the asset management system. that allows for us to get to a much more transparent level of detail, the specific properties and the types of renovations that we've made at them. And that's a list that can be shared both with you and the public. And Director Reed will mention some of them right now.
Absolutely. So there's two components to that $330 million you mentioned. $110 million goes directly to the Housing Authority, and it's in three big buckets. There's $11 million in FY23 for a new repair and maintenance fund. So we want the Housing Authority to have access basically to like small cap investments because we know we can't always plan for when things go wrong throughout the year. There's additional funding for project management so that they can have the necessary infrastructure to execute. And then the remaining funds are for 8 different properties that serve about 1,500 units. We will follow up with a specific list, but I'll mention 2 that are in your award, which include Highland Dwellings and Knox Hill.
Knox Hill, what about Woodland Terrace?
That is not yet on the list, council member.
What about Starter Terrace?
The 2 that I mentioned are the 2 in Ward 8. The remaining projects are in Ward 6 and Ward 2.
I was in Carver Terrace the day before yesterday, and they had a resident council meeting with Brenda Donald, and they were outraged at just the kind of response they were receiving about people not having answers to when they was going to get their properties fixed up. You have anything on Carver Terrace, 21st?
So there's not for those 2, although there is the $11 million repair and maintenance fund for general improvements that we don't have specifics on how yet that will be allocated. So that is something we can follow up with the Housing Authority on. I think too that the mayor may have mentioned this a little bit on Wednesday, but we finally have, thanks to work with the CFO's office and the Housing Authority, we actually have an inventory now of every single Housing Authority property and all the assets in it so that we know how to develop a long-term repair and rehabilitation and modernization schedule for them. And what we are funding are all of the properties that need to begin work in FY23. And we have to balance that a little bit with what the Housing Authority can do in a given year. There's only so many projects they can take on. They also have to relocate people. So unfortunately, we're not able to do every building all at once, but we will certainly provide you with the list. And then, Councilmember, if I could take this opportunity too, because I feel like I wasn't very clear with you before about the Berry Farm project, and just wanted to flag.
Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. So that $110 million is going to fund 270 of the 480 replacement units. This is on top of 100 replacement units that are already occupied by DC residents at Matthews Memorial, Sheridan 1, and Sheridan 2 developments. The remainder of the units, the 3 remaining 250 will be done in phase 2, which is actually beyond the capital plan. As you know, this is about a 10-year project. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention was that we are currently waiting on council to approve an alley closing for Berry Farm so we can start phase 1 of the project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The mayor and I, Deputy Mayor John Felchecchio, spoke about the Infrastructure Academy and their desire to put DC Prep in the facility at Wilkerson. And we discussed doing some retrofitting with the Northeast location and having a location in Ward 8 in conjunction with the Reunion Square project. And I did not see that in the budget. Did I miss it? Or where's the money allocated to ensure that the Infrastructure Academy, in which the Ward 8 residents fought so hard to keep in the ward to provide equity in job training and careers, stay in Ward 8?
So the funding for the Reunion Square build out is included in the budget. I believe it's actually included in the DGS budget, but I will get back to you on exactly where that is. But we are still on track to open up that space in Reunion Square. And then the funding
how much? I think, and before you answer that, I think some of the miscommunication was about where and in what phase. And I spoke to 4 points. Curtis Brothers, it was not clearly communicated. So can you tell me, I know you said it's in DGS budget. Do you know how much? Because we want to research and find that.
I'm going to have to get back to you on that, council member, and then also your question about the phase and timing.
Okay. The budget includes $7.5 million to attract transformative businesses and $3.4 million to help small and medium businesses grow. I think I saw $1.5 million for pilot activities on vacant commercial spaces. How are you going to decide how the funds will be dispersed? We can guarantee that disbursements are equitably considered in the RFP process.
So that's a great question, council member. And you'll also see in the Budget Support Act, we are recommending making some changes to, this is our Vitality Fund, I believe that you're referencing, to make it easier to get the funding out the door. So there will be a competitive process for the funding. And I believe that DEMPED is getting close to issuing a solicitation, but we'll get back to you on when that solicitation is out, so you can see what the requirements are.
Thank you. And I saw it was roughly $250 million to create what you all coined in the PowerPoint presentation as an annex at the jail on the CTF side. Is this eventually going to place the CDF facility?
Council member, the vision is to effectively close the CDF, recognizing that with this annex, we want the DC correctional campus to be able to both house residents in it, but also be able to have space for folks in the Federal Bureau of Prisons to be able to come back. So it will be closing the CDF when it's completed.
Okay, you got a time frame for that at this moment?
I believe the work for the CTF is in FY26 through 28. And I'm sure, having spent time in this with the advocacy around this, that there'll be a lot of look at how that vision should manifest in the design of both the annex and also the renovations we have to make to the CTF so it can house all different types of residents, including all the ones that are currently at the CDF.
And I'm running out of time, but I wanted to jump to the school-based mental health. What is going to be new as relates to this $3.8 million for school-based mental health and this additional $7.3 million for sexual assaults? I don't know what that means, but can you explain that to me?
I will. So for the additional funding for sexual assault allows for the full implementation of the SAVRA Act. Specifically, that act calls for much more access to advocates for victims of sexual assault who are teenagers, and allows for that advocate to be with that victim throughout the course of their connection to service and possibly the prosecution. So it allows for the implementation of the SAVRA Act.
And the expansion in the school-based mental health program has 4 different components. So 50 new clinicians to provide more than one clinician to schools that have more needs. It also includes about $300,000 for high-fidelity wraparound services to expand to another 6 to 7 schools. It does include about 8 FTEs in the Department of Behavioral Health to help manage and track and do oversight and accountability work on the program now that it's become so significant. And then lastly, it includes about $300,000 so that we can develop a good workforce pipeline to fill these roles. And this is through partnerships that we have with American University and University of Maryland to work with our CBOs so that we can get students right after they graduate from college and get them into our schools.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember White. All right, back to me.